Beverly Torres was standing at the bus stop and glancing at the road from time to time, waiting for the bus to arrive. Even though she didn't need to go far, she couldn't just walk there. Beverly had a heavy limp, which made her life a living hell. This was due to the fact that the woman was born with one of her legs shorter than the other, which caused her severe discomfort. Since Beverly grew up at an orphanage, there was simply no one to help her. Specialists in the orthopedic center said that there was a surgery that could help, but it was very expensive, and Beverly simply didn't have that kind of money. Trying not to focus on her illness, Beverly lived her life as best she could and believed that someday it would change for the better. But until that happened, the young woman worked as a seller in a flower shop and had to take the same route to work every day. If it weren't for her limp, Beverly could have easily walked to work. But for a woman who couldn't even take a couple of steps without a cane, that kind of an undertaking was simply undoable. Beverly was already used to the fact that her neighbors and colleagues shunned her, considering her a recluse. However, the truth was that the flower seller didn't actually live alone. Beverly always had her faithful dog, Buddy, waiting for her at home. She picked him up on the street 3 years ago when he was just a tiny puppy. It happened in the fall. It was raining heavily, and the poor creature was trying to hide from the piercing wind by huddling against the wall of the store. People passed by indifferently and didn't seem to have noticed the puppy watching them with his beady eyes. And only Beverly stopped and picked up the poor creature. Of course, holding the puppy in her hands and walking while leaning on a cane was very difficult, but the young woman still managed to bring the animal home. After feeding Buddy the leftovers of her dinner, Beverly spread a soft blanket on the floor, which became his bed. Ever since then, the puppy hadn't left Beverly's house and was always looking forward to her return home from work. In the 3 years, Buddy grew up to be a big dog and at the envy of their neighbors. And now, waiting for the bus to arrive, Beverly thought that it might be nice to buy Buddy a beef bone at the butcher's. But when she looked inside her wallet, she realized that she barely had enough money to last her the next couple of days left until payday. "I'm sorry, Buddy, some other time," Beverly whispered. The sound of the approaching bus brought the young woman out of her state of woeful reflections. Clutching her cane in her hand, Beverly prepared to get on the bus, which was always a difficult undertaking. Drivers already knew Beverly and often helped her get on the bus. But unfortunately, that day there was a new driver working the route who simply looked out the window indifferently. Fortunately, Beverly did manage to get on the bus on her own, and having paid the fare, was about to take her seat. To make things worse, the young woman had to go all the way to the back to take a seat in the last row. Limping desperately, Beverly took on the difficult task. At that moment, the bus started moving, causing Beverly to lose her balance and nearly fall to the floor. Of course, the young woman couldn't get to the empty seat, and therefore she looked at one of the passengers sitting next to her with a silent plea in her eyes. To her great disappointment, a plump man in the seat next to her understood everything without words, but shook his head negatively. Beverly bit her lip and tried to pull herself together. It's hard to say how things would have developed if one of the passengers hadn't got up from his seat and pointed Beverly to it. "Sit down, miss. Let me help you." The young woman looked gratefully at the stranger, who volunteered to help her at his own free will. Beverly's savior turned out to be a man of about 35, with sad brown eyes and a touch of gray hair on his temples, speaking of the hardships he had to face in his life. "Thank you," Beverly said with a sigh of relief. The man smiled at her and headed to the back of the bus to take his seat. Beverly knew that she would reach her stop in 10 minutes, so she tried to relax and followed the route closely through the window. Imagine the woman's surprise when the stranger who offered her his seat got off at the same stop. Not only that, but the man also helped Beverly get down from the uncomfortable steps of the bus to the safety of the bus stop. I'm so very grateful to you. If it weren't for you, I would have had a very hard time today," the young woman murmured. "No thanks needed, miss. I get it. My late father suffered from a similar illness and couldn't really get around without someone else's help. So I know what it's like," the stranger hastened to reassure Beverly. As it turned out later, the name of Beverly's savior was Dominic Butler. He'd just served 5 years in the state county jail and was released 3 days ago. The man chose to keep silent about the reasons that landed him in prison, but Beverly could feel it in her heart that he wasn't a bad person. People like him simply couldn't harm anyone, and Beverly was 100% sure of that. Dominic didn't live in Chicago and arrived in the city to meet with an old acquaintance. Beverly couldn't help but feel sympathy for this calm and reasonable man who got into a difficult life situation 5 years ago. The young people felt comfortable with each other and chatted about everything in the world, which made her way home seem very short to Beverly. Stopping at the door, the young woman looked with sympathy at her unexpected companion, after which she surprised herself when she suggested, "Would you like to come in and have dinner? Take a rest, and then go to see your friend tomorrow." Dominic looked gratefully at Beverly and accepted her invitation without any hesitation. Having opened the door, the young woman greeted Buddy, who started jumping around his owner, trying to lick her cheek. "Hush, hush there, Buddy. You'll make me fall," Beverly exclaimed, laughing. Seeing the huge dog in front of him, Dominic tensed up, but Buddy already walked up to him and, having sniffed the man from head to toe, started wagging his tail. "Wow, Buddy reads people well, and he definitely likes you," Beverly noted without hiding her admiration. "Well, I love animals. I've always dreamed of having a dog, but apparently it's just not in the cards for me," Dominic answered. As it turned out later, the man's house burned down while he was serving his sentence, and now he simply had nowhere to go. "Why didn't you just say so? So, if I hadn't offered for you to stay the night, you would have slept on the street?" Beverly asked cautiously. Dominic smiled and nodded his head sadly. Looking at this strong and calm man, Beverly felt protected for the first time in her life. This is what happens when you feel the inner strength and energy emanating from the person you're with. Having quickly made dinner, Beverly invited her guest to eat and made a bed for him in the bedroom. But Dominic turned out to be a decent man, and to Buddy's delight, decided to sleep on the sofa in the living room. "And who do you need to find in Chicago?" Beverly asked cautiously, looking at the guest. "The first thing I need to do is find Lionel Diaz. He lives somewhere on the outskirts of the city. 5 years ago, I saved his daughter from some thugs. But apparently it was excessive self-defense, since I accidentally sent one of the attackers to the hospital. Unfortunately, he turned out to have extensive connections, and I was arrested the very next day," Dominic answered with a sad sigh. "What about the woman's father? Couldn't he help you?" Beverly was genuinely surprised. "Even the gods themselves couldn't help me back then. And Lionel wasn't a successful businessman yet. But 3 years ago, he found a promising oil field that made him a millionaire. And a month before my release, I received a letter from Lionel asking me to find him when I get released," Dominic explained. Beverly nodded understandingly and wished her guest a good night before going to bed. Meanwhile, Buddy lay at Dominic's feet, making the man smile happily. Unfortunately, the guest couldn't fall asleep for the longest time and only managed to doze off in the morning. Dominic's thoughts were focused on helping Beverly with her health problems. The man felt sincerely sorry for the woman, who was doomed to drag out a rather miserable existence due to her disability. Moreover, Dominic was afraid to admit to himself that he fell in love with Beverly at first sight, like some schoolboy. The man tried to drive away the thought that this nice woman could ever show interest in him. The most interesting thing was that Beverly was thinking the same thing at this very moment. love isn't always reciprocal, but it definitely was in this case. After only a couple of hours of sleep, Dominic got up at dawn and made coffee for himself and Beverly. In the afternoon, the young couple decided to clean the house, after which Dominic took it upon himself to repair some of the woman's furniture that was falling apart. Then he replaced the faucet and installed a new switch in the bathroom. The man liked helping Beverly, who couldn't be happier with her guest. Imperceptibly, a week flew by, during which the neighbors virtually didn't see Beverly around. She even took time off of work to spend it with Dominic and was pretty much on cloud 9 all this time. Meanwhile, her guest started getting ready for a visit with Lionel Diaz. Dominic didn't know exactly what the man wanted to talk to him about, but he suspected that it would probably be about compensating the man for the years he spent behind bars. However, when Lionel came to Beverly's house himself, Dominic realized that he was a very honorable man. The successful oil man brought a leather suitcase with him, which turned out to be filled with money. According to the most conservative estimates, there was at least $2 or $3 million in it, which couldn't but shock Dominic. "This is your reward for defending my daughter. I transferred the same amount to your bank account. 5 years in prison is a long time, so I wanted to compensate you for the time you lost," Lionel explained, catching the surprised look of the ex-convict. Dominic stood next to the businessman's car and couldn't believe his eyes. Just a day before, he was a broke ex-convict, and now he was a rich man with millions in his bank account. After hugging his daughter's savior, Lionel promised him a position in his oil company with a yearly salary of several hundred thousands of dollars. Dominic couldn't come to his senses for a long time. He just stood there on the road, looking at Lionel's car drive away. Having returned to the house, he poured out the money from the suitcase on the floor and asked Beverly to come in. "This is our money now. We can afford everything that we didn't even know to dream about," Dominic said. "Did you just say our?" Beverly asked quietly, afraid that she might have misheard him. "Of course I did. Who else's would it be? First, we'll get you your surgery. Then we can start thinking about the wedding. What do you say? Will you marry an ex-convict?" Dominic asked with a smile. Beverly's eyes immediately filled with tears. But this time, they were tears of joy, not grief or sadness. "Of course I will. That you can be sure of," Beverly whispered, still sobbing. Dominic hugged the young woman tightly. At that moment, he felt like the happiest person in the whole world. Few people knew that while Dominic was serving his sentence in the state county jail, his wife filed for divorce, refusing to wait for his release. When Dominic got this news, the man was ready to literally climb the walls in despair. But 5 years turned out to be the very period that could bring peace and acceptance to this tormented soul. But now, Dominic felt that Beverly would never leave him and would always be there for him in difficult times. 6 months later, the young people held a modest wedding ceremony, at which the young bride could already get around without her old cane. Beverly was very grateful to her doctors at the orthopedic center, but she was even more grateful to her husband, who did the right thing 5 years ago and didn't pass by someone else's misfortune. One of the reasons why the young couple rushed to get married was that Beverly was already pregnant with Dominic's baby. The young couple was going to be parents soon. However, even more great news was awaiting the young family. 5 years later, Dominic discovered his own oil field and partnered up with Lionel Diaz. Needless to say, Beverly's neighbors and acquaintances were simply shocked when they realized that she was now a part of a very successful family. At the end of this amazing story, I would like to say yet again that the ways of the Lord are inscrutable, and none of us get to truly know what awaits us in the future.